average is not invited. Not if you're holding your company off-site in Las Vegas. We aren't on friendly terms with the bare minimum, and unenthusiastic is uninvited. Las Vegas's creative energy and world-class hospitality want to bring your company off-site to crazy new heights. That's why fear-based leadership is afraid of Vegas, and boring won't be there, but it will be watching the meeting recordings later. Plan for the extraordinary at vegasmeansbusiness.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. Growth and self-love are not mutually exclusive. Loving yourself takes effort, exploration, release, healing, understanding there's more to self-love than self-care. And while the effort to promote self-love has been a hot topic across the internet and social media, there's also been a push and a need to define self-love in a way that absolutely does not support your mental and emotional health. So today, you and I are taking a one-on-one deep dive into what self-love is not. It's important to understand both sides of the coin so you can serve yourself in the long run. So let's dive right in. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. Self-love. It's a buzzword, right? Its actions are even greater, and yet so many of us do not have a true baseline understanding of what it is, what it means, how it shows up. And in that same breath, many of us actively choose self-love daily and don't even realize we're doing it. And while that is a whole other conversation today, I really do want to break down what self-love is not. There's one reason. You've heard me say this before, but there is only one relationship that you will have for the entire span of your lifetime, and that is the relationship with yourself. Because this is the truth, it is so important to get to know who you are, what you need, what you want, how you want to show up, your purpose, and to be healed in all of those things so that you may have a relationship with yourself that is based in true love. Love in the way that you so willingly give to others, but you refuse to turn inward and give to yourself. Now, we're not comparing relationships here to the relationship with the self because they're actually two very different things. But what I am talking about is getting into a space, a mindset where you have healthy feelings, kind, inner pointed, inner focused attention, and really getting into a space where we're developing self-awareness. So let's do it, right? Let's get to it. So self-love really does have a wide range of understandings and behaviors, like I just said, but I want to simplify it down to a foundation. There's multiple things that go into self-love, and everything that I teach and everything that we talk about here is truly the sum total of what self-love is. But there are some small pieces that must be in place, that foundation, in order to truly love yourself. So let's talk about those first. The first one is self-awareness. It's interesting. After so many sessions with so many people, I have come to really understand that self-awareness is something that can be developed, but many people do have a baseline of self-awareness that they're not actually even aware of. I can teach you how to get to self-awareness, but if you naturally have a little bit of self-awareness, it does help to build self-love in a much quicker way. But self-awareness is really being aware of the self. It's understanding your emotions, what they mean to you. Remember, if you've listened to this podcast before, you've heard me say that every single one of us has different definitions to our emotions. And if you have self-awareness, you do have a baseline understanding of what your emotions mean to you. Self-awareness also means that you know what you need. You know that you can give yourself attention first, and that you can be healthy in your mindset. It's that kind attention. It's knowing what you need, want, desire, and really why you are here. The second piece to self-love in that foundation is self-acceptance. It's being at peace with yourself on all levels. Those 5 masters, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially. And it doesn't matter the order because they move around whenever you are in growth or you're moving through different change in your life. Those become different priorities, but everything falls into those 5 masters. And really, it's just about being at peace in those 5 different areas with yourself on all levels, regardless of what's occurred in your life, so your past, and what's happening now, or the future you're trying to build. It's self-acceptance. I know who I am. I accept those things. I accept what has happened. I accept where I'm going. I accept where I am now. Self-acceptance. The third is self-care. And this is now a different definition than what you may be kind of used to, right? Self-care in so many ways has gotten this rap that it is spending money on yourself or looking a certain way or pedicures or bubble baths or mimosas with the girlfriends on Sunday. And honestly, that's not self-care. Self-care is defined as being protective of and caring for the self. Yes, it is wonderful to do those things for yourself if it's within your budget. It meets the financial needs that you have. But what we're really talking about is being protective of and caring for the self. Self-care. Many people say self-love is unconditional, and let this be your first big aha moment. Love is always conditional. Sorry, it is. What do I mean by that? Self-love is conditional because we have to meet ourselves in every situation based on where we are in our current conditions. Everything that we do, everything that we experience is met through our mindset, by our perception, right, of the moment, how we're feeling in the space that we're in, the mental capacity, our past. Everything is driven through this framework of the present and the past so often. And that also means love is conditional. If I don't love myself right now, my conditions are not based in love. Many may disagree with that, but that is the truth. It's what I've seen over and over, session after session, person after person, and within my own personal experience. Even coming down to brain science and the way that we show up in our behavior. If our conditions are not based in love, we struggle to love ourselves and vice versa. There are many things that must be in place for you to build really strong self-love. We're going to talk about those today, and we're going to talk about these behaviors that really turn toxic when we talk about self-love, because those are the things that stop us in our tracks. And of course, we can't cover all of them, but we're going to really dive into some. But the first thing, in order to have a solid relationship with yourself, like I said, we have to have those first 3 things: the self-awareness, the self-acceptance, and the self-care. But we also have to have this understanding that we can't compromise ourselves to be loved or liked. And that means internally too. We can't push our needs aside and say it's okay in order to build true self-love. So we have to allow ourselves to be fully exposed inward and not hide from our true feelings and needs. We have to be honest. Our greatest error and upset comes from not being honest with ourselves. If we do not ask ourselves, what do you need? Danielle, what do you need today? Insert your name there. Then we can't actually get into a place of true honesty. And if we can't do that, we can't truly get into grounded self-love. One of the biggest killers of self-love is getting too comfortable in your life. That comfort zone that everyone talks about, I talk about it too. But when we get so comfortable in our lives, we set back. We take ourselves to the edges of our lanes in our lives and we say, you know what, when change comes, it'll come. And then it becomes so disruptive to us that we really let go of self-love and our mental health and our emotional health because we haven't been active in what we need and want in the first place. In order to really have grounded self-love, we have to kind of stay on our toes. We have to stay present, stay active in our life, stay within our spark. Because if we get too comfortable, we go from living life to sort of maintaining our lives. And when we're maintaining, we're not leaning into self-love. We're leaning into the status quo. Just like your relationships outward have boundaries, your inner relationship has to have boundaries too. We don't often talk about what we'll accept from ourselves. We don't even think about it. But in order to really thrive in self-love, we have to have some self-boundaries that are applicable to us, right? Not to everyone else, but to us. What will I accept? What am I willing to really engage in internally? I loved what Esther Avant said in the episode last week when we were talking about building self-confidence. And she said so often when we show up and we break our own self-trust or we don't meet our goals, we really damage the reputation with ourselves. And what we're doing is to really build that reputation with ourselves again. And self-love is all about that. And so are self-boundaries. It's so important if you want to have grounded self-love, self-boundaries and that self-reputation are number one on that list. Respect is another piece to self-love that must be in place. If you don't respect yourself, you can't love yourself. Just like if you don't respect someone in your own life, you don't say, I love them, but I don't have a lot of respect for them. Those two things don't usually align, right? Another piece to all of this is self-compassion and self-empathy. Compassion and empathy are so important when it comes to self-love. Compassion to know that we're going to screw this up because our humanness says that we will. That life is all about growth, and growth usually happens in the times that we make a misstep, right? And empathy meaning that it's okay for those screw-ups because I was not the person I was the day before. And I didn't really have all the information maybe, or I made a choice that didn't best serve me, but I know that I don't have to destroy myself because I made a misstep. I don't have to start over. I don't have to go to the starting line again. I just need to actually know that my screw-ups are a part of my basic humanness, and I don't have to destroy my self-love because of those things. Acceptance is a huge part of self-love. Relationships are always filled with grace, right? We allow things from other people that we may not allow from ourselves, but we have to shift into that mindset that it's okay for mistakes to happen, even if we're the mistake maker. Of course, that's just a baseline of things that have to be in place. We know that there are so many others, but let's really get into what happens and what it looks like when we use self-love in a toxic way. Because sometimes, like I said before, we mask or call our behavior self-love, but they are not that at all. So let's talk about them. First one is when we use self-love to hurt others. There's a massive difference between caring for and putting yourself first and using that to dismiss our behavior or to be rude or mean, dismissive, whatever it is to someone else in the guise that this is loving yourself. We can't hurt others and find self-love. Love is never ill-intentioned, whether inward or outward. I've seen this happen so many times where women have come in and they're learning about self-love and they'll come back and say, I don't know what happened, but my relationship's kind of a mess with so-and-so. And I'm like, well, what's going on? And they'll say, well, I'm putting myself first. So I'm not answering their calls, or I'm being a little bit more reactive, or I'm just not putting up with their bullshit anymore. And so, that's what self-love is all about. And no, that's not what self-love is about. Yes, self-love is making sure that you are a priority, But that doesn't mean dismissing everyone else's feelings or, even needs and calling it self-love. That's not a baseline to self-love. That's actually a toxic behavior that destroys relationships. What we're talking about when we're putting ourselves first is really identifying, do I have time? Does this meet my mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and even financial needs? And if it doesn't, how can I adjust to make it work for me and perhaps the other person? Self-love is not about putting yourself on a pedestal. It's not about selfishness. It truly is about this grounded inner love of the self. It's that self-awareness, understanding the emotions. Remember the three: self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-care. We don't hurt others and call it love. It never works. The next one that truly is a place where self-love can turn toxic is when we disconnect from connection that actually does serve us. This is a very tricky place. Listen, when we grow, a lot of times the risk of growth is that we do outgrow relationships, people, and situations. And yet there's this other piece where these relationships are really healthy and we do some growing and we simply begin to throw away those relationships in search of something else. And that can turn very toxic. When we refuse to be vulnerable and we hold other people to a standard that is of the version of where you are right now, you take away the connection. Remember, we are wired for connection. Trashing good relationships will not help you love yourself more. Distancing yourself from negative relationships with boundaries, 100%, yes, that helps increase your self-love. But if you're in a positive relationship, whether that is a friendship, a family relationship, a marital spouse, whatever relationship, and you have a good standard, throwing it away will not make you love yourself more. That is a huge misconception. I see it so often. Well, I'm growing and they're not growing as fast as I am, and so therefore I'm throwing it away. Or, there's a big or, you can slow down. You can slow down and let the effects of your self-love impact your partner, impact that relationship. See what changes within it. When we are in periods of growth and self-love, we often try to burn down the house to rebuild it. And when we do that, we're often building it on top of ashes that haven't been cleaned up. And it will always burn down again. And so we want to really get into a place where we're holding ourselves accountable in our good relationships, where we love ourselves, we don't fully disconnect, but instead we allow this new sense of love to impact the connections in which we already have beautifully existing in our lives. The third one. I see this so often. It makes me laugh because it is absolutely not possible. The most mindful people have bad days, okay? Everyone gets to a place that is not, the best version of themselves at one point or another. I always laugh because I'm a baseball mom, right? And as mindful as I am, as zen and peaceful and self-love driven as I am, you call a bad play and I'm probably going to lose it, right? And I always think, I wonder what these people who are my real friends think about me. Is she that person? What's going on? But I want you to know that self-love can really turn toxic if you live by this idea that there is only positive vibes, right? That it's this constant mantra of positive vibes only. It is such, again, cover the ears, please. Such bullshit, you guys. It's not possible to be happy or positive 100% of the time. We want you to lean into positivity, but not toxic positivity, and call it love. It doesn't work that way. Things happen. Life changes, like I just said, and we have to deal with those things. We have to heal. This is why I teach emotional intelligence. We can't avoid life and say, It's so wonderful because there are times when things aren't wonderful. And when we say that things are wonderful and we call it self-love, it turns toxic. Why? Because at some point you're going to witness how hard things are, and that illusion of self-love and positivity crumbles. We have to get into a place where we are truly identifying what's going on, because that's what builds self-love. That's self-acceptance. That's life acceptance. Avoidance is not self-love. And so we have to really be truthful with ourselves. Remember, back to that self-respect, back to that honesty. Let's move on to that next thing that I see that is truly not an act of self-love, but it's when we use our excuses to support unhealthy behaviors and call it self-love. I'm going to give you an example of this, and you may shudder because you probably have done this. I've seen it so often in my day-to-day life, but also within my office. But here it is. When we use food or substances and call it self-love. I'm going to treat myself because I love myself. Who has said that, right? Who has said that? I'm sure most of us have. We overindulge and call it love. It happens in so many things other than just food. It happens with shopping and sex, even self-care that is identified as materialistic. This isn't self-love. It's a faked way into making ourselves feel like we're taking care of ourselves. If we're overeating, over-shopping, overindulging, it's really slapping a label of self-care and self-love that discounts our true needs. Unhealthy behaviors do not support grounded self-love. All it does is it provides this faked mindset. And guess what? Even when you lie to yourself, you still know the truth, right? It's not like you lie to yourself and you're like, oh, great. I'm glad that I was able to tell myself that and believe it. You know that you're lying to yourself. Unhealthy behaviors and using them as an excuse will never lead you to true self-love. So think about that. When you say something like that, like I'm going to treat myself because I love myself, make sure that it's not an excuse, but a true act of treating yourself. True acts look like I am going to rest because I've worked really hard. That is a healthy behavior. I'm going to allow myself some space and a pause. That's a healthy behavior. Don't use unhealthy things and call it self-love in hopes that you have a grounded expression of self-love. The fifth thing, when self-love becomes toxic, is when it becomes selfish. Self-love, again, is not about disregarding other people's needs and feelings. If you find yourself disengaging in favor of works only for you, especially in a marriage, you're taking your self-love too far. I want you to think about that. Self-love is not selfish. I've said this so many times, and so often I have received these emails that have really outlined how self-love is selfish. And I always respond back to, please look up the definition of self-love, because what you just described is not self-love. Self-love is not about being selfish. Remember, the grounded foundations are all about understanding who you are, accepting what it is that you are and what you're growing into, and self-care, caring for the self. That is self-love. I want you to understand, self-love is not selfish. It is prioritizing the self, but when you're doing that in a balanced and grounded way, it's not selfish. So think about the way that you show up. Are you loving yourself? Are you being selfish? What is the difference? Selfishness is being constantly and exclusively concerned with oneself, seeking or concentrating for your own advantage, for your own pleasure, or your own well-being without the regards of how you handle yourself with others. When it comes to self-awareness, there are really two levels of self-awareness beyond what we look at, in the spiritual realm, but really just talking about the now, the self. Layer one is you. how you accept yourself, how you see yourself, you as a whole. The second layer is how you impact others. What does that look like? Controlling. That's a big one. Selfishness comes through trying to control. This is different than trying to control a moment or yourself emotionally. I'm talking about controlling every aspect of every event with someone in society, in relationships, in everything that you do. Selfishness looks like only being motivated by having your interests and needs met. That's not how relationships work. It's not how the world works. It is a dance, a tango, if you will, when it comes to our feelings. Selfishness looks like belittling or dismissing other people. It's also avoiding responsibility. It's not caring about how you impact other people. It's constantly acting in your own self-interest instead of asking how you impact, right? That level two. It's having no empathy for people who are suffering. It's showing no remorse when you hurt other people. And it's using manipulation to get what you want. Those are selfish things. In all of those things, there is no self-love, right? So I really want you to think about the difference between self-love and being selfish. Let's keep going. Now, this is one that I see quite often. I put it further down on the list because it's not as bad as, say, when we become selfish in the name of self-love, and yet it does have its own problematic behaviors. So when we put excuses in the way of actual self-love work, it can turn our self-love toxic. What does that sound like? It sounds like, if you can't love me at my worst, you can't love me. Or you don't deserve to love me at my best. Of course, that applies to outside relationships. Inward, that sounds like I've messed up so many times, and so I don't deserve that. Or I deserve this because I have messed up so many times, and I'm just going to erase it and call it self-love. That's not true self-love. So often we put so many excuses in the way so that we don't actually have to do the self-work, and we slap the label of love on it. We say, oh, I love myself. And then it all comes crashing down. Just like I said, we burn down the house and build it on ashes. This is that space. If you want to love yourself, you have to do it from the framework of love. You have to do the work. Healing is as much about releasing as it is unlearning. Let me say that again. Healing is as much about releasing as it is unlearning. Self-love often comes in the unlearning factors, right? When we remove the limits, when we remove the excuses, and we get down to a true framework, we get into a space where we put true love in place. So I want you to think about, what excuses am I using to not actually do the work? Am I slapping labels, or am I giving myself a true framework? Big, important questions. It is about discovery. Like I said in the very beginning, it's about release, it's healing, it's about exploration and effort. If you want growth, you have to find self-love too. Again, not mutually exclusive. They are separate things, but they do support one another, and they do help us increase on our path towards purpose, joy, health, all of the beautiful things that are truly our birthright, but we often forget. The truth is, every practice, everything that we do, every experience we have has the ability to go positive or negative, right? And when we confuse the positive with the negative, or the negative with the positive, that's when things get a little tricky. And so we have to identify that and make forward movement out of the lack, right? The lack of things, the lack of understanding, the lack of really challenging ourselves into better. Okay, let's keep going. We have 4 more on the list of toxic behaviors that really remove self-love. And it is number 7, refusing to listen or validate feelings when they bump against our own. This is a major killer in relationships, and the big part of why, when we grow, our relationships become very troubled. No one, and I do mean no one, has the ability to process their emotions the exact same as someone else. It just doesn't work that way. We all have our own individual feelings and our own individual definitions of what our emotions mean to us. Happiness means something completely different to me than it means to you, as does joy and anger and frustration, and even neutrality means something different to me than it means to you. How we get to our emotional definitions is based on our experience, our mindset, our perception, what we've learned, what we've walked through, how we've connected to trauma, how we've disconnected from it. And so we have to remember that we can't get into a space where our feelings are the only thing that matter. Self-love is not, nor will it ever, only be about how you feel and how your feelings are met and validated. If you ever want to have a relationship with someone else, you have to be willing to have some emotional intelligence and absolutely lean into the fact that someone else may feel something about the way you show up, right? It doesn't mean you have to validate it. It doesn't mean that you actually have to agree. You can agree to disagree, but you can't just devalue someone's feelings because they don't meet your own. We can say, wow, I'm sorry that that's the way you feel. We can validate it for them. We can say, wow, I didn't realize, whatever, but we can't just dismiss. That is not loving ourselves into a better space. A lot of times we do trick ourselves into believing that, but that is not true. All right. That also lends itself into number 8 on our list, which is refusing to give a damn about anything or anyone. There is a difference between not caring about what others may think of you and leaning into this blanket of, I don't care about anyone or anything anymore. We all know that's not true, right? We do care. By nature, we care about people. We have to stop acting like we don't in hopes of self-protection, because that's really what it comes down to. If I allow myself to be vulnerable, if I allow myself to engage, someone may actually hurt me, and that will hurt my self-love. And guess what? That means that you actually haven't built a foundation of self-love. You do care, and we want you to care. We want you to have connection. You need connection. And it's important that you don't have this blanket negativity across everything that's happening in your life, because you will actually end up very empty. It's not self-love. It's the absolute absence of self-love. So think about that. If you have put up this barrier, this wall of I don't care, you really are putting up this wall of protection in hopes that this faked version of self-love isn't crumbled. So think about that. Number 9, self-love is never about pushing yourself to a limit that is unhealthy so that you can be more. Self-love is about loving who you are at the time that you are engaging in that self-love. It is not about trying to get to something else, about being something else. It's about who you are right now in this moment, and about, who you're growing to be. That's fine. But it's not placing everything in the future and calling it self-love. It really is about self-acceptance in the now. I see this so often. These people who come in and they try to push their way into healing. And then they have the days where everything feels like an absolute shit show, let's be honest. And they can't figure out why they're so emotional. They can't figure out why everything's hurting. And it's because of this. I'm trying to push myself to a limit to be more that I'm not ready to be yet. And you have to sit back. You have to know, I have to love who I am today in order to grow into who I love tomorrow. There will always be things that we want to change about ourselves. And there will always be this motion that we want to get to someplace else. That's just us by nature, right? It's a part of accepting that life changes, and that's a beautiful thing. You can't push yourself into more and call it self-love in hopes that it's going to stick. It's not going to. It's self-acceptance in the now. Who am I? What do I want? What do I need? How am I going to get there? Again, there's those 4 questions that I ask repeatedly, and it's because it is, like everything else, the baseline to self-love. It's the baseline to peace. It's the baseline to self-esteem and confidence and all of the selves, all of the self practices. It's within those 4 questions. You can't love yourself by pushing yourself into a faked version of you. Got it? Okay. Number 10, self-love is not focusing on only one element of the self and ignoring everything else. I see this often too. Well, I just want to focus on self-esteem, and I don't want to address all of the reasons why I don't have self-esteem. I just want to build more, and that's loving myself. Nope, not going to happen. No matter how hard you try, that won't work. You have to realize that you are a whole human, a whole being. You are a masterpiece, right? No painting has just one little singular dot, one little stroke. It's a combination of strokes, and that is who you are. You have to realize that you have to focus on the whole in order to have a whole self-love movement. Self, a combination of things, right? And so you have to really focus. I often ask the people that I work with, what do you want? And they'll tell me this list of things. And as I write it down and I hand it back, I say, okay, let's put those into categories. Where does that fall in our 5 masters? And it's there that they realize that they have given me things that fall into a combination of things, right? It's not just a singular effort. Someone may come in for self-confidence and realize that they have all of these other pieces that are not allowing them to get to that self-confidence. Or they come in for healing and they realize that everything else is impacted. We can't focus on one and build a true, focused, grounded, unified self, a self that you love. So think about that. And the last one on our list is to refuse to deal with anything that makes us feel anything but love. This feels like we're talking about back on the positivity train, but it's not necessarily the truth. In our healing and our growth, there's a lot of times where we do a lot of hard work to kind of navigate through the hard feelings. And in those hard feelings, we want to move through them as quick as possible so that we can get to a better side of things. And I get it, right? Because healing, growth, all of it, change, it can be very difficult. However, in order to truly engage in self-love, you have to be willing to deal with all of the things, right? We have to be able to dive in, be okay, again, back to self-acceptance of where we are, what we feel, what we need, and what we want. If we want to love ourselves, if we want to get into a place where we are really prioritizing our wellness and our mental health, we're really maintaining our space of self-love, we must embrace ourselves. We must really get into a place where we're practicing self-kindness, common humility, mindfulness, where we let go of judgment, we set boundaries, we forgive ourselves. We surround ourselves with supportive and loving people who are our champions. We can champion for them and they champion for us. We get involved in loving intimacy and deep emotional connection. We give time, support, and we restore ourselves. We change our negative mindsets and we don't ignore our problems, but we release judgment and grudges. We practice self-love. We give ourselves everything that we need and more, but we also willingly give that to others in our lives as well, those who deserve it at least. We focus on the things that really support our overall lifestyle. We celebrate our accomplishments and reward ourselves for our efforts, but not in a way that's toxic. We spend time, we connect, we build beautifully. And that's what life is all about when we can connect with ourselves that way. Self-love is comprised of worth, awareness, self-esteem, and self-care. It's being present. It's knowing that you can accept yourself in your wholeness, treat yourself in kindness, and really cultivate an experience with your life. And when we cultivate a negative experience, we turn self-love toxic. It doesn't support us. It doesn't give us that real deep connection that we need with ourselves. In order to really live a life where the relationship is the number one priority, I want you to ask yourself this fundamental question. If this was provided to me from someone else, would I call it love? That question is groundbreaking, because if we asked ourselves that question, we would not get into a space where our self-love turned toxic, because the answer would be no to all of those things. We wouldn't accept someone downgrading our worth. We wouldn't allow other people to push our boundaries, at least once we recognized it. We wouldn't let other people invalidate our feelings. We wouldn't let people spin our positivity and put it in a form of negativity. This is very important. If I accepted this from someone else, would I call it love? When you shift your focus, when you get out of these toxic behaviors and get into true self-love, everything changes. Growth accelerates. Your relationship with the world changes. Your ability to show up for yourself changes. Self-love is essential, but it is the combination of all of the things that we're working towards. We talk about personal development, right? Because we are developing the self into this being, into this true human that you have always been meant to be. You're just fine as you are. But the question is, do you want more? And if you do, and you have any of these things in your daily practice, it's time to examine it, root it out, release, and create something different for yourself. Self-love is essential. And when you put it into practice, you truly begin to get your life together, girl. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips to bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, you can follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, YouTube, and now Threads. And don't forget to follow me on Insight Timer, where there is a new 15-day affirmation course where I take you on a journey through your brain chemistry to help you really connect with affirmations and elevate a beautiful and grounded practice that helps you create your greatest desires. Also, please check out the Get Your Life Together Girl website at getyourlifetogethergirl.com. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.